Okay, so now we're going to talk about triple bottom line, which is a concept where not only do we consider the monetary or the profit associated with the product or service, but we also think about the people and the planet. And that's where the concept of triple bottom line is. So we count for monetary costs, environmental costs, and social costs. And this is a really common picture, this Venn diagram thing of the triple bottom line. So when we talk about monetary costs, we haven't really gone into this much, but we're going to do that when I get back from my trip. But we're going to be looking at the material costs, the labor costs, and the overhead costs, and that's how we account for all the costs associated with monetary application. And the reason I have a picture of a textbook here is that we're going to look at the cost of making textbooks. In environmental costs, we want to look at three different things: the waste generated, the energy consumed, and the toxins that are released. And if we can minimize those things, then we will be paying attention to the bottom line associated with the planet. On the social cost side, there's several ways that we can account for social interactions of our product. One is the product itself. Does it have social value of the product? Is it something that in itself is a good thing, like has exercise, allows exercise, or is there safety involved in it, or is it an unsafe thing? Some people believe that guns would fall into the category of an unsafe product. The second area is the human resources or the working conditions of the people that are making the product. So we want to make sure that they're not sweatshops, that they're not child laborers. Laws. That's sort of as a minimum when we look at overseas issues. When we look at the workplace issues associated with the United States, we also would consider what kind of benefits do the people have that work in the company. Do they have child care available? Do they have elder care? Is there a gym on campus? Do they even provide health and vision benefits or life insurance, things like that? We also want to look at the diversity of the workforce, making sure that there's a large, diverse workforce that will help to contribute to the social fabric of the entire company. And the third area is we want to look at community involvement. Is the company community involved? For instance, Target is very much involved in the community in which they have stores. They often give back to local schools. But there's other ways in which companies can encourage things like community service. So what we do is when we look at triple bottom line, we look at a process map. And a process map is just simply, it outlines the processes from raw material all the way to disposal. So we really want to look at the concept of the original raw material, like what did things start as? And there are not that many original raw materials. When we think about it, it's mostly plant materials or things that come from the ground, some sort of resources. So we want to make sure that we're understanding where those initial raw materials came from. And also, it's really important to look at the boundaries of the system. Regarding profit, there's a different sort of boundary than there is regarding social and environmental. In the profit, we just look at the boundaries of the company itself, like what exactly does the company buy and how do they change that product and what do they sell. And that's a different boundary than what we look at in the social or environmental realm. Socially, we want to look at all the raw materials we're getting. Are they environmentally friendly? Did they start out environmentally friendly? And in the social aspects, making sure that we are buying raw materials from companies that are also socially conscious. So the boundaries of the system are different when we're looking at different aspects of this triple bottom line. This is a picture of a process map for textbooks. And along the top we have, along the top we have the raw materials, the manufacturing, the distribution, the use, and disposal. And this is pretty much going to be the same for every product that's manufactured. Over here we want to look at the ultimate raw materials. In this case, we're looking at the paper that goes into the textbook, the ink, and the glue associated with it. The paper comes from trees, the ink is from oil, the glue is from animals possibly, or also possibly from oil. And then these raw materials, we haven't really mapped here exactly what goes between trees and paper, mostly because we are a manufacturing of textbooks, so we're not in a manufacturing of paper. But sometimes people do go into each of these steps and look at what is the highest waste associated with that. But we haven't done that. So we look at getting the paper and it transports it to the manufacturing place. Each of these things are transported. The paper is cut. So often when we get something as a raw material, there's waste associated with the packaging of that raw material, whether it's a pallet or whether it's a shrink wrapped or something. So we often show a waste stream right here. And then there's also, in the case of cutting paper, there's waste associated with cutting paper because the paper might not fit into the size. The paper of the book, size of the book might not fit into the size of the paper that we receive. And then they came in the ink. We're assuming that there's some sort of barrels or something that comes in that creates waste, and then the glue also that has a waste. And these things then go together, flow together to be bound. So cut paper, print, and then binding, and then it goes to distribution. So there's a transportation associated with that, and then distribution would be like a distribution warehouse, and then it's transported to a retail. So if we think about Cal Poly, there's a distribution warehouse associated with, say, McGraw-Hill, who makes some textbooks, and then they bring it to El Corral, which is right here, and each of these are transported. And then the item is used by you, and there's might be waste associated with maybe the packaging in the use process. And then at the end of the system, it's transported to a disposal site. So we're assuming it's going to a landfill or something. So you can see all the way from the raw materials to the landfill is what we try to map in this process map. For the fully allocated cost, or the profit portion of it, if we're a manufacturer of textbooks, all we care about is the manufacturing side. So all we care about is the cost of the materials as they come in, the cost associated with the processes, and then the profit associated with the sale of it. We could also be a distribution company, so then we would draw the boundaries of the system differently. We could be both. We could go all the way integrated processes where we go from the trees all the way to distribution. But the boundaries depend on who you define yourself as a company. In the environmental, though, we want to look at the whole thing. We want to look at all the way from their ultimate raw materials to the distribution. And we want to identify all those places where waste or energy are consumed or toxins are produced. And then when we look at social, we also want to look at the whole process. We want to look at from the beginning to the end. Now, sometimes this boundary is actually a very difficult thing to identify. For instance, in the case of maybe paper. So when we look at this boundaries, do we really care about the trees? Are there fertilizers associated with those trees? Do we care about, if we look at oil, do we care about how that oil actually gets to the location where it is produced into ink? And if so, maybe then we're concerned about the pipelines that it's transferred in. And the pipelines, then we might be concerned about how those pipelines are made. So we can go back and back and back and back, and the boundaries of the system become quite difficult to define. Many people are thinking hard on this about how to define these boundaries, but I just want to sort of let you know that the boundaries are an important aspect of triple bottom line. One of the ways that people are thinking about doing this is to convert everything into carbon emissions. So we might want to look at measuring all the greenhouse emission associated with the aspect of the manufacturing and transportation across the whole product life cycle. And what people are trying to do is convert these things to CO2 equivalents. So whatever greenhouse gas is produced, we convert it to CO2. When we do this, we can actually do some kind of mass balance in the whole system to make sure we're keeping track of all of the CO2. This actually then becomes quite difficult, though, to do and to think about how, again, the boundaries and then what are we considering. One of the biggest problems associated with is the distribution. So if we're looking at something like trying to figure out the CO2 equivalent of, let's say, a computer, what we really want to know is where that end use is, where are we using that in order to calculate just the transportation aspects. And everybody uses just computers in different places. And so the distribution is a variable that is hard to quantify for one particular product because it depends where that product is used. And so that's another aspect that is a little bit confusing when we talk about this CO2 equivalent calculation. What I want you to do now is I'm going to have you stop. We're at the end of this part of the video, and I want you to create a process map for an apron, very similar to the process map that I created for the textbooks. And we're talking about a product that's a 1 unit per package, that we have a packaging like a plastic bag associated with it. The raw materials that are used are cloth, thread, ribbon, paper, and plastic. It's produced in Indonesia, and it has a high level of automation associated with it. It's sold into the United States. So all of those give you clues about how to build this process map and how to identify the areas of the largest waste associated with this and the largest energy consumed. So that's what I'd like you to do, is to build a process map, and you need to submit it. You can either build it you can draw it by hand and submit it, or you can submit it electronically into Blackboard.